Hello, and welcome to the All Things Narrative podcast, where we explore the relationships between the stories we love and the stories we live. I'm your host, Derrick Hatch, and let's get started. Yo, 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 yo! What's up, everybody out there? I couldn't resist. I'm sorry, man.
You did the signature, man.
I did the signature. Oh, man.
If you did it, now, listen, I can't do it.
Oh, no. Okay, I'm sorry. We'll start over. Now, you...
Yo, 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 yo.
Yes.
Luther.
Yes, that's right. We got Luther Menard in the house for a very, very special episode of All Things Narrative, because this episode is called Life in the Gray. And for many of you, I know, right? For many of you out there who maybe have followed my podcast adventures over the years, you're thinking, wait, what is this? Life in the Gray, All Things Narrative.
Is this a flashback?
Was this a flashback? Worlds are colliding here. And that is because, for those of you who don't know, Life in the Gray was my former podcast with my former co-host, Luther Menard. And now we are back in action. To be fair, we do get together, pretty often, right? As much as we can with our schedules.
The busyness of life, we make it
right.
work.
But we do get together still, but we haven't recorded a podcast in at least a couple years. So figured this would be a good time to just get back together and kind of reminisce and take a trip down memory lane.
Wow. So we're going back. We're taking a little flashback here.
We are. That's right. That's right. Now, not only do I have the All Things Narrative podcast, but Luther has a podcast as well.
Yeah, that's right. You can find us over there at on YouTube at The Transfigured Life. It is, what's crazy? That podcast / YouTube channel is very much a reflection of what we used to do with Life in the Gray. Yeah. Just an Orthodox Christian version of it,
Yeah. No, I could totally see that, though. I could totally see that. Yeah. One, if you check out his YouTube, subscribe on there. His channel's doing really well. Thanks, I'm really YouTube is probably one of my weaker platforms for the podcast. So I have, lots of goals to get to where I'm at with you guys, because you guys are crushing it on YouTube.
No, thanks, man. Yeah, thanks for the shout out on your podcast here, and thanks for it's been growing slowly, nice and steady over there on YouTube. It's been fun. I'm doing it there with Father Jonathan. He is a priest over there in New York City. Has an interesting perspective. Yeah. He's like the older version of you.
Really?
In a sense. I know you both are very creative. He's very down to earth. You're someone that I would find is down to earth, but I just like that he's willing to go there. And you're that.
I really enjoy listening to him, so we probably would get along fantastically.
Yeah, for sure.
So what we're going to do today, it's almost going to be a little bit of narrative therapy-ish.
Okay.
So one of the things that we do in narrative practices is I take clients basically through their life story. Now, that life story, yes, there is a macro life story, but as you've probably heard on other episodes here, there's lots of different narratives that make up our lives. And so what we can do is we can trace a narrative through your life and have a conversation about it. It could be relationships. It could be about your history of learning a particular skill. It could be your career, and it could be like what we're going to talk about today, your faith journey, and specifically what that looked like through the years that we were doing this podcast. And so we're going to kind of go back and take a trip through Life in the Gray from its inception all the way to when we finished it and what brought us to this moment here today. And we're actually going to play, and you'll be able to hear some old clips from the podcast. And we're going to just kind of listen and kind of comment and converse about them and talk about, kind of where we were at the time and how that maybe is similar or different to where we are now.
Wow.
But we're just going to have some fun with this,
Let's do it, man.
And so... just thank you guys all again for being here for this ride. And we're just going to have a little Life in the Gray reunion. And so let's get into it.
Wow. So I'm here for an experience.
This is going to be an experience, man. For sure.
Let's go. Let's drive.
When things aren't black or white, we live our life in the gray.
Join us in conversing about God, church, and culture. My name is Derrick.
And this is Luther.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the first episode of the Life in the Gray podcast. My name is Derrick.
And I'm Luther.
How's it going, bro?
I'm doing well. I'm good. I'm just happy to be here. Derrick and I talked about this for a while. Super excited. Finally, the conversations that we have together, we finally get to bring it, to the screen. So we're excited about that.
All right, so there it was.
Wow.
Like the first 20 seconds or so of Life in the Gray.
We were puppies, man.
We sound like puppies, right?
I know. I still got that little stumble I do where I chat a little bit and I'm like, well, and here we are.
Yeah.
That's crazy. But no, that's wow. That's when we were young.
I sound like I'm 12 or something.
Yeah. I mean, we were what, like 25 when that popped? How old were we?
Yeah, that has to be right. At least that was the year Addie was born. So yeah, I was 25. Wow. So that means you were probably what, 23, 24, somewhere around there.
Like that. Now we're pushing 30. Man.
Now I'm 31, so I've crossed over.
Sheesh.
Crazy, right?
Wow.
So flashback to 2017, early 2017.
Should I close my eyes for this?
No. Now, in early 2017, you and I had both been working at a nonprofit for a year and a half. We started at the same time, and we met each other. Our first days were both at this staff retreat in the summer, right? Over that year and a half, we started to have a lot of conversations just about life, but also about our faith and theology and the church, right?
Right.
And we had about a good solid, maybe a year or so where we would just like jokingly say, man, we should record these and make a podcast, right?
Right.
And then one day, I don't know what compelled us to do it, but I think you guys were over at our house. We had just bought this house and we just sat around the dinner table and all these ideas were coming for like names and what it could be like. And oh man, do you remember some of the names that we came up with?
I remember, I could only think of one.
Which one?
So I know, I'm so glad we didn't call it this. Right? But I remember Crackers and Juice.
Crackers and Juice, yes.
Was something that we were throwing out as a...
did become a real podcast.
Right. I know it was like something that was already made. But I know that we were throwing that around, not because like we thought it was a fire name, but we were, it was a little bit of like sarcasm there.
Yeah, tongue in cheek, right?
Yeah, tongue in cheek for sure.
So we ended up going with Life in the Gray, which I recall that was one of our first ideas, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, when we said Life in the Gray, what do we kind of mean by that? And why did we decide to call it that?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So I think a huge part of us landing on Life in the Gray was the nature of the things that we were talking about.
Yeah.
And Derrick and myself, something that was interesting about us is we saw things in a way that not everybody would see it the same way. Like you have someone that's maybe looking at, a situation that's playing right before their eyes. And everyone's like, oh, okay, that's fine. But we were asking the questions of, well, why is it that way? Why are we doing it that way?
Yeah.
How did it become what it became? So I think when we would sit and joke around and talk about, this potential podcast, part of that was birthed out of this idea of dissatisfaction with certain things in culture or curiosity about why we, accept certain norms and traditions, things like that. And so it was just appropriate that it would be called Life in the Gray because we didn't always see things as black and white.
Exactly. In fact, that actually made it into our tagline here.
Right.
So after talking about this idea of Life in the Gray, I think, I don't know what our wives were doing, but I remember it was just you and I were just here sitting at the table.
Right.
And I just brought my laptop over. I took out GarageBand. We had no microphones, no nothing.
Right. And we just
started recording. Yeah. And I think we were trying to do video as well. We did a few episodes that day, I remember.
Right.
But we just went for it. And so,
man, are you sure you want to do this? This is like showing baby pictures.
Like, this is when
100%.
Right.
This is like showing baby pictures.
This was his first steps. And
Yep. Yeah. So our very first episode ever was Where Was God During Hurricane Irma?
Oh my goodness. I can't believe we even did an episode on that.
Yeah. That was like right after Hurricane Irma happened.
Right.
That was like right after my daughter was born. And I had like this early life crisis of let's start a podcast. Oh man!
Why did we make that the first one?
I think we just needed to get something out there.
Just have something
We were like,
rolling.
let's tackle suffering like right off the bat.
Right.
Super light topic to start off on. We had several episodes that season 1 that definitely caught people's attention, especially with We Were Working, because at this point the podcast wasn't released on any wider platform. We were putting it up on like SoundCloud or something like that.
Right.
And if we had like 10 downloads, we were excited. Like we were like, oh my gosh,
Right?
10 people heard this.
And we were super ecstatic when someone outside of the U.S. would listen.
Right.
Like someone from Africa just heard us.
Yeah, yep. Because most of the people who listened were just people we worked with.
Right.
And we had some cheeky titles. We had Can I Love God and Hate the Church? Our altar calls biblical.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Would Jesus own a rifle? With Proverb Newsome, who's been on this podcast before, actually. Yeah. So one episode, though, that a lot of people came back to, and probably like the first episode that I recall people actually started talking about, was Has the Church Ruined Generosity? AKA what we dubbed it as the tithing episode.
I remember that bad boy.
So I'm going to play a little clip here from what I would dub as my first rant that I went on in the podcast.
Yeah.
And so I really don't know if I want to hear this right now, but let's take a peek to see where I'm at in 2017. Here we go.
Oh, I can't wait.
And if we're people that really truly believe in the gospel, we don't give out of compulsion either.
And that's why it just irks me when you walk into a church and you look at your seat.
Yeah.
Let's say your first time at this church. You look at the seat, and what's on the seat? A tithing envelope. Way to freaking welcome you to the church. Like, welcome to our freaking church. Give us some money. Like, it just feels so wrong. And I feel like for millennials, for our generation, bro, like, that kind of junk's just gotta go. Like, that's just not gonna fly with us. I'm sorry.
Yo, that's still hilarious today.
I'm so embarrassed by that.
Welcome to our freaking church. You bro, you were cussing in your heart through that rant.
Oh my gosh.
How do you still feel about it? Do you still kind of have
like
the
tithing
same
envelopes and stuff? So it's interesting. I picked this because this was a rant that people brought up a lot, this episode, right?
Really?
In the beginning, in our early episodes, this is one. And I think out of all our episodes in the first season, this had the most downloads, was that episode. So I think what was interesting was like, there were a lot of stories at the time about scandals going on in churches with giving, right?
Right.
I personally have seen certain questionable giving things, and the whole idea of how churches talk about tithing, I still think there's a lot of things that are really sketchy wrong with that. I mean, from televangelists like on TBN to just your local church, right? And just the way that, like, I do think it is a very misunderstood concept in the church. It's interesting though, because like I have a business, and so it's like, I understand, at least I would hope that having a business now, I understand money a bit more. And I've worked deeper in nonprofits than I was then. So I understand like kind of more like how money works and the necessity of asking for, like stating, a price, like for a business, right? Or a nonprofit, like being upfront about, here's what we need to fund this, right? So there is like some understanding I have of churches when it comes to giving, but I do think it is easily, money and all that is one of the most abused things in the church. Would you agree? Where are you at on all that?
Yeah, no, I think the nature of the rant at the time was like necessary.
Yeah.
Just because like, I mean, like you said, you look at, and there's obviously like, this doesn't classify, everyone doesn't fall into this critique.
Of course,
right?
of course.
There is this is like a huge generalization, but when you see stuff, you know, the extreme versions, like what you see on TV,
Yeah.
where it's like a guy is like literally on stage, like dancing on money. Woohoo! Like that's a real thing. Like Clef Dollar, you can look it up.
Yeah.
Or having to justify why they need a private jet or something like that. Those are the extreme views. And
I think what really bothered me, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think what really bothered me at the time was that that's what the world sees.
Right.
Like for Christianity, right? And that's just kind of how they define it.
So they think everybody is doing that or like that.
Yeah, or they think like, oh, all churches are just after money and all that stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, on the day to day, I'm glad you have a grounded perspective because, I mean, you know, churches do have bills to, you know, they have to run the lights and things like that. So no, that part's understandable. But I do, you know, get like, if you do come to the church for the first time, you're seeing a tithing envelope, you know, it could probably like send a certain message, right?
Yeah. I still like to this day, like in terms of like passing a plate or the tithing envelope, like if I had a church, that's not how I would do it. I still think like, I mean, we do this, not to brag on it, but we do this at my church where it's just essentially like, you know, if you want to give, then great, give. You know, we have a place in the back you can give and you can give on the app, but we're not like gonna hold something to you and say, all right, you know what I mean? When somebody's passing something to you and you just feel compelled and it's just some, you know,
and sometimes that could just be on the person. Like I know that if I visit a place and, you know, the plate is passed or something like that. And let's say like, hey, my wallet's in the car or I only carry card, you know, like it's like, oh, sorry, you know, sorry.
Well, and I think on like to get on a deeper level with this as well, I think if you go back through our episodes, where you see we'll end up is really fascinating when you see kind of all the steps it took to get there, right?
Oh,
because I feel like for me, there was a lot of tension that was building in terms of like, do I even want this anymore? Do I even want to be a Christian anymore? Right? And you see with every progressive season that tension is building more and more where I'm like trying to hold on, but I don't know if I want to anymore.
You know what? It's crazy that you said that. I think life in the grave for us, in ways, it was therapeutic.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Because we got to air out the things that we were seeing and experiencing, but it led us somewhere. Yeah. And I think even for people around our lives or even whoever's listening to this episode, like there has to be a level of like processing your journey. You have to. You can't miss that step because if you don't, you might in a decade from now go through a life crisis. But if you're not expressing the process of where you are, you're missing out.
Well, and the experiment with Life in the Gray was we were essentially processing out loud publicly, which did give a lot of people that sense of resonance with their lives. I think that's why a lot of people listen to Life in the Gray.
Yeah, they're like,
was that
too.
They heard us processing. They're like, oh yeah, you're doing it publicly. Thank you for doing. There are a lot of people who would express like, thank you. Remember the guy like who emailed us and was like, I'm driving through like the Alps in Switzerland, blasting your podcast and thanking God for it. Right. So it was just like, there were some wild things that people would write in and say, but you had a journey as well. And so, again, I've been going back to these episodes, and it's like my journey and your journey aren't really surprising when you get to where it landed, because I feel like the seeds are planted.
Did you see it going that way? Like as you listen
I want to play a clip now of one of your rants.
Okay. And do you think that rant kind of shows you seeds and elements of where it made me land?
I want you to hear this, all right? Okay. This is a rant that we brought up a lot before and after this episode, and it was this whole idea of fun church.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Welcome to fun church, right? So as I've been going through these episodes these past few weeks, you've articulated essentially this in so many episodes in small ways and in large ways. So I'm going to go ahead and play one of those clips from the Fun Church episode, just to give an idea of, I think, some of the seeds of where your journey was going.
Let's hear it.
And so when we talk about this idea of fun church, Derrick, we have to probably try to define the term fun, you know? And so if the idea of fun for fun church is this idea of, you know, how, like, this consumer mentality, how I can be served, what would be most appealing to me and my interests, then I disagree with fun church completely.
Yeah.
If it ever gets manipulative, where it's just like we're doing these things because we think it attracts the seeker-friendly person, or it attracts just the outside world, it's like it then begins to push the question: what culture? What are we? Who do we identify with, and what kind of agenda are we trying to push forward?
Wow.
How is it hearing that?
Yeah, so I was like, wow, I said that. So I do, it's coming back to me. So the backstory behind that episode, if I remember correctly, is with this organization, I took a bunch of kids to
Yes. Yep.
to some like youth event, and I forget what was happening on stage. Man, I'd
Probably
have
like fog machines.
Yeah,
and
there's
strobe lights,
fog machine, you know, kids playing on stage, people running at church, and it was like a clown show, you know, if I'm just being honest.
Well, because it was all hype. I think one of the things you said is something along the lines of like it was hype and little substance.
Yeah, and so I kind of remember that's kind of what led more to me talking about Fun Church and the rant when we got there. But it's crazy because at that time, like Orthodox Christianity or anything like that was not even a concept.
Yeah.
Like that would never have been like at that time. I was not ready for that time.
Right. Sure.
You know, but just going back to the idea of Fun Church, I could see how that seed, like I've always wanted something real and ancient and not always changing with the times and the seasons.
Yeah.
And that's something I didn't like about what seemed like in some spaces to be this fun church kind of mentality. So even around that time when we recorded the episode, I know of a church that was having like movie night things. It's hard to explain.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's like you watch this big screen movie, and like that just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah,
like I get it, like you want to be relevant and things like that, and I think there's a place for like being relevant, reaching the culture and things like that. But like when sermons become more about like I don't know, Barbie, because that's what's relevant.
Sure, now is what's talking,
out. Yeah. You know, people. There's so many churches preaching about Barbie and less about like
the gospel of Barbie.
Yeah, like the Sermon on the Mount. Like it's just
repent, Ken.
You know, like it just makes you like scratch your head. Like, is it for like who are we competing?
Who's it for? Yeah,
who's it for?
Totally.
You know, so
yeah, and it's like,
what did you think about that Fun Church?
It's interesting because it's important to just bring up at this point that Luther and I at this point in our journey are what we would call professional Christians. In other words, where you're paid money to essentially like do the things that Christians do, you know, like disciple, teach.
At that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So there's this.
It was risky business to do what we were doing.
Oh, yeah.
We were definitely dancing on the edge there.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I definitely know there's people who are listening that were like, I don't know about this whole life in the gray thing. But it's fascinating to look back on because it's like, I think we both have had more experience since then. And I think like there's core parts of these convictions that we still hold to. And I think, like, I know for me, for example, like, I'm more open to seeing how churches can creatively engage people, right? Mm-hmm. I think as long as we're not watering down what's at the heart of what we as Christians are supposed to do, you know? Mm. If we say we're going to love people Let's actually love people. Let's not just give them like a nice thing to enjoy. Let's actually walk alongside them.
Right.
Because I think I've just seen as I've gotten older and I've done lots of things, I've participated in things as I was younger in youth groups and stuff. And I've taken a lot of youth groups to things. I think I've just really seen what are the things that have stuck and what are the things that fizzle out, right? So like some of the most extravagant, flashiest things I've ever taken people to or been a part of, you might look back on and say that was a cool, neat experience, right? But the lack of substance there. I think some of the most powerful experiences have been just like being out in the middle of the woods and just being isolated from all the noise, right? All the cultural noise and just having a retreat to get away from everything. One of the things I don't talk about as much that I do at All Things Narrative is I do work with the youth group of my church. And when we did our youth retreat, it was, there were moments where we got hype, we played games and did a lot of fun things, but we were all just staying like by the lake, and just trying to like no cell phones, like very little technology, just trying to just be present, right? And I think that's the thing for me is like, are we really like cultivating people, encouraging them to be present with one another, and in that presence going deep? So I think that's the thing that turns me off is the thinness of it.
Yeah. That's good.
Now, some of the other topics that we had for season 2 here were we did an episode on Christian cliches. We did a Valentine's Day episode on love and lust. Did Jesus die for Sunday mornings? Which that was a fun one. I really like that title there. And then we did a lot of episodes where this is where I think the podcast was starting to become a little more focused. Where we were trying, like the Fun Church episode was a part of this, where we did episodes on like science and hell and social justice. And, a lot of these episodes were things that I think people were requesting, and we were starting to really hear what other people were interested in having us talk about. Now, one of the things that came up in season 2 was this conversation about denominations. Now, we gave it this kind of tongue-in-cheek title of which denomination is right, quotes, right? But knowing that obviously we weren't going to do that. That wasn't going to be the point of the episode. But when I listened to this episode, I think that there's a lot of things that are really fascinating. I think this is where a lot of the seeds of your Orthodox journey really shine.
Really?
I think so. I'm going to play you a clip.
Oh, wow. I gotta see this.
I know for me as well, there was, to be real, and you might even hear a little bit of it in the clip as well, but there was a little bit of that church hurt going on where I had been a part of a denomination just a couple years before and had experienced some hurt about the way they did things. And in trying to go to and explore these different denominations, just the wrestling with things that I was going through. And I landed in like a very interdenominational church, and that's the church I'm still at today. But yeah, let's take a look at this clip because I think it's really fascinating for both our stories. What denominations have become for a lot of people is like, well, we're the ones who've got it right and everyone else has got it wrong. Is that what you see? And if so, what are your thoughts on that?
Wow. Well, I feel like it's very, it's a bold statement to be like, we've got it right and they got it wrong. You know what I'm saying? I would say, even when it comes to like who got it right, I feel like that may be the wrong kind of way to look at it. When it comes to which denomination has it right, I think instead of saying right, we could probably be like, okay, which is more consistent or approaches the biblical hermeneutics in a proper way, or more, most faithful to the scriptures.
Yeah. Well, and it's subjective because I think most of, if not all denominations would claim that they're being faithful to scripture. Which makes it interesting, right?
Yeah, that's where it gets
Because
all
then, yeah.
Because at the end of the day, even the early church fathers, they differed in a few things, but
They did, yeah.
the essentials are what matter. Like, are we staying true to the gospel? Are we staying true to the, Jesus? What do we say about the Trinity? And I think those things are what are most important. Like, you even look at you and I in our relationship, there's so many things we agree on. But then I'm sure as we continue to go through conversation, we can realize, man, there's some things we differ on as well.
Right.
Differ in as well. So I think there's beauty in that there's so many different Christians and there's so many different shades to them. And that's kind of cool, like what Life in the Gray is all about as well.
Yeah.
Man, that
There's
was
more.
so
There's more to
cringy.
this clip. So let's pause here real quick.
Okay.
There's more though.
You
There's
gonna
more
give me more?
coming. There's more coming.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was so cringy. I'm melting. Wow.
What are your thoughts as you were hearing that?
Man, it's crazy. Like, when you say that these were seeds and steps, you really meant that.
Yeah.
You meant that. So it's funny. It's funny for a couple reasons, right? So for one, at that time, like, obviously I said, if someone thought that they were the right way, it was quite arrogant.
Right.
I said something to that effect.
Right.
Which I would probably have a different kind of conversation with my
Being
younger
Orthodox,
self.
yeah, for
now. Sure. But also, I also see the threads of where you were headed too, with even how you phrased the question to me. So I don't know if you remember how you kind of said it. It's like, hey, like, Luther, what are your thoughts on just like one of these groups thinking they're, right or whatnot? And
right.
So the way that you phrased that, right? We're the ones that got it right and everyone else got it wrong. And the reason why that stood out to me is because even years down the line, with how much you appreciate Orthodox Christianity, you have a great respect for it. You said, I like it, Lou, but this one thing here, this is the only thing here about it that I wrestle with. Like, the fact that, so... And you kind of know what I'm talking about, right? We've sat...
More like the exclusivity, right?
Right,
that piece of it, for sure.
Right. I know that could sometimes rub people the wrong way. And I think that sometimes perspective is everything, right? So, like, there is groups, like, even when we were in our Protestant camp, like, even from, like, a Calvinistic perspective, that you felt that.
Oh, for sure.
In the way it was brought to you, the approach of it was like, yes, we are right. And everyone else has just this super liberal, uber goober type of Christianity. And obviously that's not a representation of all Calvinists. I want to be very fair and charitable.
Yeah.
But many times people felt that kind of underline. Now, with Orthodox Christianity, like when we say that, it is the original church that links back to the apostles, Christianity that's been practiced for 2,000 years.
Right.
It's not really a flex. Like it sometimes even is, for me at least, I'm speaking for myself, like sometimes it's been an awkward conversation.
Right.
Like, how do I say that we're the originals? Like, like how do you say that in a way that doesn't come off like, how dare you? Because we're so used to schism.
Yeah. Well, and I think I'm much more sympathetic to that because if you study the history of church, what you guys are doing is you're tracing back to the beginning. Protestant, I think a lot of my frustration was like, how can the church that came after Martin Luther or the church that came after John Calvin or John Wesley or whoever, how can you say that strand, that strain of church is the
strand.
Church? I think that was my issue, right?
Right.
And so I think now when I hear this, it's less of like with Eastern Orthodox, it's less of the tracing of it and saying like we are the church as it, and it's more of I think my issue now has actually changed to where it's now more of like, well, in 2,000 years of history, the church has gone through a lot of crap.
Sure.
And a lot of schism and a lot of splitting.
Right.
I'm reading, you ever heard of Dominion by Tom Holland?
No, is that book that you had on the
on
the front?
Big, thick historical book, right?
I saw that on your kitchen table.
Right. So he's tracing this and how all of this messiness of church history brings us in the West to where we are today, for better and for worse, right? And I think my issue now is like, when you look at how much good for all of the terribleness, how much good for the ultimate betterment of humankind, civilization, society came out of some of the people in the Catholic and the Protestant church. And to say that like that's not, maybe not of God or maybe not of us, you know, like that's more of the issue I have now.
Right.
Because once you start to see all the things that have changed the world for the better that have come from that, right? And I'm like, that can only be an act of God that like abolished slavery. And the book really traces that this comes from like Protestant, that mindset. And if you didn't have that mindset of like, let's question this, right? Let's kind of go against what's been said here, and let's, right? That actually way of thinking has changed things for the better for a lot of ways. So I think that's more of my issue now. It's not the exclusivity. It's more like the lack of inclusivity in understanding the rest of where the church plays a role in that.
Yeah. No, I hear you there. So like the Orthodox perspective, we wouldn't deny that good things have happened outside of the church, right? So, So like, there's good everywhere in the world, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's refreshing to hear, because I think sometimes when people hear this idea of the Orthodox Church and seeing its ancient Eastern roots and think, oh, so is everything outside of that a lost cause?
Sure.
And the reality is there's a lot of good that happens in the world. So the claim of it being, the church that Christ has established doesn't take away from good work that, good humanitarian work that people are doing, nice community work that's happening around the cities. And there's even things that like outside of what people would consider Christian, right? So like maybe some, I don't know, Mormons, or even, I don't know, even who, you name it, they're doing some good work in an area or something like that. We're happy about that work. However, the Orthodox Church is just saying, hey, as it pertains to the Christian faith, this is where the sacraments are found. This is where apostolic succession is. This is where, the traditions that have been passed down from generation to generation can be found. And so it's more on that focus. It's not saying anything about someone's eternal state, right?
Sure.
We're not saying, oh, if you're outside the Orthodox Church, you're bound to burn in hell. No, like certainly we don't say that. We'll say, hey, this is where the church is found. This is where salvation is found. And it's in the Orthodox Church. And we're agnostic to anything outside of the church. Does that make sense? So we'll say, we know where the church is, and we'll speak in that manner. However, how the Holy Spirit, how the wind blows, he can move any way he wants. Right. And we're not aware of it. We just can tell you where the church is.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that's that's a healthy kind of perspective, which still invites people to this, not make it seem like, hey, this is an exclusive group. You're not invited. Everyone's welcome to the church. We're saying all are invited, and for those that are not there yet, hey, feel free to inquire, investigate for yourself, and see if this is, a home for you.
I like how you put that.
Thanks, man.
So, I think
I would
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I would change one thing about what I said. That when I said see if it's a home for you, it is a home for everybody. It's not like, oh, see if it works out for you. Like it's for everyone.
Yeah. Oh no. Totally. Yeah.
But sorry, you were gonna say.
I think the thing that just amazes me is just looking at how big God is. And how God works in all kinds of circumstances that seem impossible or seem like we wouldn't expect. And that'll come up later in a clip I'm going to play later. But to go back in this Orthodox direction though for a bit, I want to play the next part of the denomination thing, because this is, from as far as I could tell, the first time that I could trace in this particular issue that became like a huge reason for your journey going to a huge catalyst, we'll call it, for going Orthodox. And it was actually a huge part of what brought me back to faith. So I want to play this part here.
Let's hear it.
I've been to a Catholic church and an Eastern Orthodox church. And I think the saddest thing is that even though I'm a Christian, I'm not allowed to take communion because of this deep, deep schism that has taken place over the churches.
Really?
Yeah.
Why can't you take?
They will say, like, before they do the Eucharist, and they'll say, like, if you are not of the Catholic tradition, we'd ask you not, or the Eastern Orthodox tradition, we'd ask you not to take communion with us, but to pray for the reunifying of the church. And it's just funny because I just sit there and I'm like, well, isn't what you're doing right now by not letting me come to the table, like, isn't that only contributing further to the problem rather than, opening the table up? Because it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I really struggled with that when I was at those churches.
Wow. Where do we start?
I know, right? That was the first time we talked about that
That's
topic, though. That was it.
You know what's crazy? When you brought that up, I had no clue. No clue
Eastern Orthodox
what
was?
you were talking about. I was like, okay, Catholic, I'm aware of that. Orthodox, what?
Yeah.
Oh,
that's great.
But I just went on like, oh, okay, they don't let you take? Okay, cool. But I was like, what? It's probably some weird branch of Christianity.
Yeah.
Man, it's funny.
I was offended, I think, because shortly after I was at the Eastern Orthodox Church was when I had that whole experience where I went into a church, had communion, and basically had my faith revived. And where I had that moment where I just felt God affirming his presence in my life, and just really, that experience was 8 years ago, and it's still really powerful.
Wow.
In the fruit that it produced. So the fact that I went to the Eastern Orthodox Church and was denied that experience, but I found it somewhere else, I'd love to get your kind of thoughts on that.
Man, you are really putting me in the hot seat.
Life in the gray.
This
Listen,
really is like,
you can put me in the hot seat too all you want when we get to some of these later clips here.
Can I at least get a sip of water?
Get a sip.
Can I get a little gulp?
It wouldn't be life in the gray if we didn't have these conversations, right?
Right. It's classic life in the gray.
But I genuinely would just like to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. I'll try to be as honest as I can.
Okay.
So I think that it was kind of seen as offensive, right?
I think that's how I took it I don't take it that way anymore, but at the time I took it that way.
Now, the thing is that the Orthodox do that in a sense of love. It's not like, hey, you're not part of the cool crowd, you can't come.
Right, right.
The close communion is not only in honor of the sacred mystery, because we have a certain perspective about the sacrament, but also for your sake too. Based on what we believe about the sacrament, for those that are not in a place to take it, it could be like a sense of judgment for them.
Yeah. That's fair.
In a sense of like you read in the book of 1 Corinthians, where some have taken it and have, gotten sick, and some have even, died.
Right.
Not implying that if you took it, you were going to drop.
No, but what was happening in that church, right, in Corinth, was that the way I've understand the context is that there were people who were coming to the church that were poor and people that were rich. Right. And for the poor people, communion is an opportunity to eat, to be filled, right? You had all these people that were indulging in communion, right? Treating it as like this banquet, this feast at the expense of the poor. And so there was this lack of understanding of what communion actually was. And that's what, right? So
for us, like, there's a sense where we want to, there's that honor for what it means. And based on like, early church writings, there's this idea that, those that have prepared, like, because there's a whole preparation for us, even as Orthodox.
Communion, sure.
There's sometimes Orthodox Christians can't even take communion.
Yeah.
Right. There's some weeks where you excommunicate yourself in a sense.
Oh, wow.
Right? Like
I didn't know that.
If you know that maybe you haven't really gone to confession and there's some sins that you've really just, or a sense of like, maybe your priest who's your spiritual father knows what's going on in your life. It's like, hey, let's, he'll probably direct you in a proper way. But you want to talk to Orthodox priests about these kind of things. But basically the idea is there's things that go into it, right? There's prayers that we pray, preparing up for communion. We fast before we take communion. So there's a lot that goes into it. So it's not like this casual experience for us.
Yeah.
Even though we want to do it as frequently as we can. So that's the mindset behind that. Like the sacrament for us, like if it means something different for other Christians, then it just makes sense that it'd be closed off, right? So like if there's some Christians, and I'm not saying this is your view, I'm just saying in general, some Christians just think it's symbolic, right? Oh, I symbolically eat the teachings of Christ, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And if some other Christians say, hey, well, this is the actual body and blood of Christ for the forgiveness of sins. If someone believes that, partaking of this sacrament is cleansing, if they have this idea of a foreshadowing of what happened in the Old Testament where Isaiah, you have this, this partaking of the spoon that happened. I don't know if you remember that story there. And this it was like coals that were on his lips and it was burning or whatever. Yeah. But this idea that it's purifying for us. Like we are partaking of divinity. And for some that might be a crazy view to take. Like, oh, you're partaking in divinity? Yeah. They probably don't want to deal with something like that. Sure. So there's so much to it. I think when we take it from that perspective, and depending on what time this episode drops, I should have an episode actually on Holy Communion and the Eucharist that you could check out on the YouTube channel. So I don't know when this one pops out. You said like what?
November, probably.
Somewhere in November. Yeah, so it'll probably be out by then. Me and Father Jonathan are working on a case for Holy Communion.
So let me ask you one follow-up question then to that, and then we can move on.
Sure.
So you talked about how like there might be times where you don't take communion because maybe there's things going on in your life that are undealt with, right?
Right.
So how do you reconcile that with the fact that on the night Jesus was betrayed, the apostles took communion in the state that they were in? That was just, they're going to abandon Jesus. Like there's so much in their hearts that's going on. And Jesus institutes this thing called communion with people who are not holy in that moment, to say the least, at least in terms of like what we know their actions were going to lead to.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what are kind of your thoughts on that? Because like I understand communion as like a way that we receive God, right? Because I agree that we take God in, we take Christ in a very real way through communion. But we take Christ in so that we can be healed, we can be transformed, we can be made Christ-like. And maybe this is just the Protestant in me coming out when I say this, but it's like, even if I don't have it all together, I need to come to that table and receive that, because that's where I know life is found.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point, Derrick. And so you're definitely onto something good there. When I say that we prepare for communion, so I'm not saying that you have to have it all together to take, because if that's the case, nobody can take. Right. You know what I mean? And so I'll just say as much as this, and I would definitely kind of revert this to like a spiritual father, or Orthodox priest, because I don't want to speak on behalf of the church and say something that's not correct or true. But it's so much so like I would think of like you're detracting in a way, like you're living in a state that, like, let's say, like, for example, this is just an example. If you're committing adultery with your wife, I mean, probably shouldn't take. You probably should.
You mean like you're not repentant about it? Like you're doing it?
Yeah.
Like I see what you're saying.
Like repentance in that case would not look like, hey, let me take communion. It'd probably look like, hey, let me stop doing this and then let me.
I get what you're saying now.
Yeah. That, and that's just an example, but these are the kind of things that we're talking about. Like we treat the sacrament as something very precious and holy, and so there's a sense of like preparing for it, right?
Yeah.
Even from the night before, like our churches have something called a Vesper service where there's prayers in the evening. Like we're preparing to partake of this wonderful mystery that you mentioned, that we receive healing when we take of it. And so it's a beautiful thing that we treat sacredly. And there's one thing in the liturgy that I always love that we sing. It says, the holy things are for the holy. So it says the holy things are for the holy. And then the liturgy goes on to say, but only one, I can't sing. One is holy, the Lord Jesus Christ.
Right.
To the glory of God the Father. Amen. Praise. So basically, like, it says the holy things are for the holy. And it says, but there's only one that is holy, the Lord Jesus Christ.
Right.
So yeah, man. So hopefully that was helpful in some way.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that was good. And before we move on from season 2, one last question.
Talk to me.
On the record here.
Okay.
Do you still hate birthdays?
Do I still hate birthdays? I don't.
Have you come around on birthdays?
Yeah, so I mentioned in previous episodes with Derrick I wasn't a fan of birthdays or whatever. But for the sake of culture, I kind of just like, I obviously say happy birthday to people. I acknowledge birthdays, things like that. But for me, it's not really my thing. Now being Orthodox.
Yeah, what's the Orthodox position on birthdays?
Birthday. I mean, celebration is a nice thing. It's a good thing.
Sure is.
And we sing happy birthday for people in our church. We acknowledge people's like name day. Like we have certain like festival things that we do. We acknowledge a lot of things in the Orthodox Church that, I'm cool with birthdays. So
I'm glad they brought you around. It's time.
Welcome. Yo.
Man, I'm a huge believer in that all things are spiritual, right?
Gospel's very intertwined with justice. Wouldn't you say?
Part of this is breaking down walls and barriers. This is life in the gray.
When things aren't black or white.
We live our life in the gray.
Join us in conversing about God,
Church,
and culture.
My name is Derrick.
I'm Michelle.
And this is Luther.
We're starting to upgrade there.
Yeah, that you feel the upgrade there. That intro is fire compared to the original.
I
know you got a soft spot for the original.
I
right?
had a soft spot for the original. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
It just spoke to me as like it had some retro feels to it.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's of course a big difference you notice on that intro because we added MT, or as now she's referred to as MC, aka Michelle Turner, who is now Michelle Cook.
Yeah, she's married into the Cook family.
That's right. So, yeah, unfortunately, we did try really hard to schedule and get her to be here today, but it just this meeting has been rescheduled like four or five times.
Yeah.
So
at this point, I was like, listen,
out.
I will walk here to get to this meeting. So
yeah. So
but thanks for being patient with us.
Yeah, but this season 3, right? This is when I feel like we had a lot of more people listening now. We were easily like listened to all over the world at this point. We were getting a lot more traction. And I think this is probably when we were having the most fun as well. I mean, we were still very tongue-in-cheek, but like listen to like some of these titles. Does Christian music suck?
Yeah, we're getting a little bold.
Does the internet make you an expert? Let's talk about sex.
Let's talk about...
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is the Reformation overrated? Which was definitely a huge foreshadow.
Wow.
Right?
Do you have clips from that one?
Not here, but
Send me that episode. I
Oh,
just
yeah,
need to
you gotta
hear
go
what,
back and
what
hear
I
that.
believed about that.
yeah, I feel like that was the first time I kind of heard you walk back some things about your Reformed background.
Really?
I think that was the first time I think where like you were kind of like, yeah, you got a good point there about Martin Luther being anti-Semitic trash. And some of the stuff he says, and Calvin like burning people at the stake for being heretics. You know, I think you're onto something.
Wow.
So, yeah,
you made me this way.
Yeah, it's my fault. Or if you're Orthodox, you're welcome.
Thank you.
But so one episode I remember we had a lot of fun with was this one. I'm going to play you a clip from, and this kind of highlights just how much fun we were having at the time.
Right.
With just this fantastic episode. Also, this did become, I think, in our top 5 most popular episodes we ever did. Why the hell should I stop cussing?
Cuss it. Oh, that was a classic.
Yeah.
I would say the S word. So like if I hit my foot on something or whatever, I'm just like I'll say it under my breath, something like, you know, I'm not going to say it, but
I got a funny story about that word. The first time I ever preached at my current church, I was giving my testimony, and I said, in light of this life shift, that's what I was supposed to say, but that's not what came out. And I didn't realize it until like 10 seconds later, and everybody was like laughing, and I was like, oh, thank God I go to a church that would do that.
Yeah.
But I was like, that actually worked in context with what I was saying. That was probably more powerful than the word shift.
yeah.
Yeah.
The word there that I was referring to is shit.
Just laying it out. See, okay. When we record that episode, you were like, I'm not going to cuss on this episode. You know, it's a cussing episode.
I know,
But
right?
now you're like, I don't care.
Listen, I was so rigid back then, man.
Yeah.
I was so much in my Christian bubble.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I can't cuss out. I'd literally be, dude, come on.
I'm like, bro, just say shit. Just say it.
Just say it. You won't melt. I promise.
Yeah.
Oh man, that was a fun episode.
We were having a lot of fun
At that point,
time.
we were like that cool rock band. Like I feel like we were.
Remember when we recorded in Salento Coffee?
Yeah,
and they shut the whole place down just so we could record. Yeah, that was.
We had a live show once.
We're gonna get to the live show.
Yeah?
That's the next one on here.
Okay, yeah. So like, at that point we were starting to. We had some cells behind us. We were grooving.
Yeah,
you know?
no, we definitely were. That was the marathon. Remember when we recorded 5 episodes back to back?
Wow.
Do you remember that? And they had to shut. They had to
day.
shut the coffee shop down because we were like way over on hours. And so at like 8:00 at night, we drove to Michelle's church's offices on Palm Beach
got
Island.
That last recording.
And we did 2 more episodes in the room.
And that's when my brother-in-law James came.
Yep, James came and he was recording them all.
Recording. Wow.
Yeah. What a
That's cool.
We were in the grind. Like that was like,
thanks, James.
I think the
Burrow, for
hardest
doing
we
that.
were all working. You were doing all the prep, like in terms of the layouts and the organizing, the agenda, like not the agendas, but the direction the episodes went in.
Right.
Michelle was doing social media. I was doing all the editing.
Yeah,
so it was like
we had work to do.
Yeah, we were busy there for sure.
Yeah. Wow.
I still think my categories still stand though. The difference between cussing, cursing, and swear words. You know, I don't know if the Orthodox, what you guys think of it, but it's like cursing is like terrible. We don't want to curse people, right?
Right.
We don't want to raka. We don't want to do that kind of thing. Cussing is culturally inappropriate words, right? That our culture will just say like, yeah, these are not, you know. And then swearing is like basically invoking the name of God for your own agenda. And a lot of the times those kind of words do that.
Right.
So
yeah. I don't know what the the church
Orthodox
says
view
about
on
that. But like words. I mean, we put weight to them based on what we're.
Well, you mentioned also that we did a live show, and I think this was like this was peak Life in the Gray, where we did this live show. It was on race. That was the topic that we went with. It was this was 2019.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of
too.
It was a full house. We packed out. It was a small church building given, but it was it was larger than our church services were at the time.
Wow.
Like it was a lot of people. It was packed.
Yeah.
A lot of people we didn't know that
Some
showed
people
up too.
wanted us to keep going.
I know a lot. That is one thing that
They're
I
like,
wish
"Do
we
it
could have done
again."
more, is done
Yeah.
more live shows like this. But I'm going to play a couple clips of you and I when we were talking about race.
Okay.
Just a couple of the moments that when I listened back, that a lot of people I think really connected and resonated with. And just kind of shows that the direction of the podcast was going from like ranting about church and all that to more of discussion about issues in culture and how to engage those as Christians. And like there was still a lot of theological like wrestling as well.
Right.
But I do think there's a shift that's happening around this time. So I'm going to play these clips here.
Yeah.
Then you grow up and you look at the news. You move to a city as I did to West Palm. You begin working in the inner city, which I have for the last 4 years. And you begin to realize that the narrative that you inherited as a little white millennial boy in the suburbs was wrong. And you begin to look at this and you begin to see that you were handed the wrong narrative. And that as a white male, you're actually a part of a different narrative. You're part of a narrative of people who have oppressed for centuries and centuries and centuries in this country. And you realize, and you wake up one day and you see, dear God, what have my people done? What have they done? I want nothing to do with that. And of course you feel white guilt. Of course you're going to feel it. I didn't ask for this narrative. I didn't ask to come from a line of people that mistreated yours. And I'm sorry on their behalf. But I can tell you that that's not a narrative I want to be a part of. That's not a narrative I identify with. But I acknowledge, as we're going to talk about later in this discussion, I do acknowledge that. And I have to work through that. And I have to admit, I can't sugarcoat it. I can't say that America was peachy perfect and great at one point. Because I know the truth now. The scales have fallen from my eyes. And so I can't help but feel white guilt.
Derrick making me feel bad. I got black guilt. I'm sorry. I mean, racism changes over time.
Yeah.
Because of the way it's, the way it's wired. And like I think about just as a little kid, I wanted to be white. I thought that white was better. This is just, and the crazy thing is no one teaches you that. No one tells you that. Like I never had a teacher that, say, hey, white is better or anything like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The fact that that's kind of ingrained, like where does that come from?
Yeah.
Like how, and you look at society, like if you Google like most beautiful people in the world right now, mainly white people will show up. Like that, like if you do it right now, maybe that's what you'll see.
Yeah, that was heavy. That was such a powerful event we put on.
Yeah. Well, and you were so transparent too, like about.
I was just listening. I was like, I was that honest?
Yeah.
Dude, I was.
You got very personal.
I was
at this event.
transparent. Yeah, for sure. Wow. Man, I'm proud of younger me.
This one you're okay with.
So, those episodes were a lot later. So that's when we were becoming
Closer
crystallized to who we are now.
For sure.
Opposed to like season 1 where we were like wet behind the ear.
Yeah.
Puppy.
For sure.
But something that you said there, and kind of broke the tension there with that lighthearted joke, black guilt. I mean, it's like you were transparent. I would say you were transparent there as well. Like this idea of like, hey, I didn't. I kind of woke up into this story
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm using the word narrative a lot. Like I think 2018, 2019, that's becoming more conscious on my mind all the time.
Right.
And just starting to see the narrative worldview is starting to emerge more and more in just terms of how I think about everything.
Right.
And recognizing, right? That was the peak of like me learning about all the crappy, terrible things. And with things that you know about, but you don't actually like really confront.
Right.
Like reading Columbus's diary or reading the stances of churches during the Holocaust or during
wild
or during the pre-civil rights era in American history. I think that was really when I was starting to wake up and realize a lot of that stuff. If you see me as a white person and you connect me with that, I don't want any part with that. And that carried over to the Christian conversation later.
Yeah.
Like, right? When I think about it, like what I was saying there is like, I don't want this narrative, right? That's the struggle 2 years later I had with the Christian narrative was in waking up to all that stuff. Then I said, well,
sense.
I don't want you to look at me as Christian and assign all these, right?
Right.
Oh, I just made that connection there.
Wow.
Like I never thought of it like that, but it's interesting seeing how
these things are
thinking,
weaving
it's
together,
deconstructing, you know, this is like really where
we
the
did have a
deconstructing-
deconstruction.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
And this is really where it's coming out publicly.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. It's crazy how a lot of people go through that.
Yeah.
Because like I've seen even like famous people do that.
Oh,
like, go through-
100%. And we were doing it publicly. That's still the craziest thing.
Right.
As we were just doing this stuff, you know? But yeah, that event was I still have people that talk about it to this day.
Right.
Who were there. So.
Wow. So I know I mentioned like how normative whiteness was.
Yes.
You know what's crazy? I know I said that no one taught us that. And in a sense that's true, but I feel like in subliminal ways it was taught.
Yeah.
You know? Like
How so?
I mean, it's a lot better today, but I remember like going to certain places and like think about what Barbie represents, right? You know, you're not going to see Barbie really with a fro and, you know, a disco, whatever. I don't know. But whiteness was normal. You know what I mean? So if whiteness was normal, then anything that wasn't whiteness seemed like, oh, it was either not, you know, abnormal or anomaly or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Do you think, looking back, that was 4.5 years ago that we did that episode? Where do you think we're at now? Do you think we've gotten better? Do you think we're still stuck the same? Are we worse?
So some Black brothers and sisters disagree with me on this, because when I went Orthodox, they're like, hey, you still fight for, you know, justice issues and things like that. And I've taken some heat even from some Black Orthodox people. You know what I mean? So like, hey, you don't address these things enough. You know, it's all about faith for you, kind of thing. I think that these kind of matters are more so present in individual kind of situations. And I'm not saying there's no such thing as like, you know, it's tough. Like, I'm not saying like there's not things that happen on a bigger scale, right?
Systemic.
I'm not saying there's none of that doesn't exist, right? There's things that we thought was normal, right? Like, for example, you have the Tuskegee experiment, right? We trusted medical professionals, right? And they gave STDs to a population of Black people, and these people were sick and they died. That's history. That's a fact.
Yeah.
But if you said that at the time, that's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Crazy how that works, right?
You know, right? So, like, who am I to say, like, there's not forces at times at play? Like I'm too aware for that. Like you've heard me on the episodes long enough to know I am more on the skeptical side than I am on the I'll just agree nothing's happening, everything's fine in the world. But I feel like we need to ask questions. What's going on the individual on the day-to-day? Because the thing is, like, Derrick, I know you don't have a racist bone in your body. Like you embody love in your life personally.
Oh, thanks,
so
man.
yeah. So like if everyone's taking that responsibility, then our world becomes a better place.
Yeah. So it seems like there's an emphasis that you're placing more, if I understand you correctly, like more on individuals need to take responsibility for how they need to address racism where they're at, right?
Right.
And I think maybe, is it fair to say that at the time you were a little bit more of the perspective of a more like, we need to change the system, we need to, right?
Yeah,
like,
I had more of like, let's restructure the whole system, things like that.
Yeah.
But the system is made of individuals.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm not saying there's not work to be done on a bigger scale or anything.
Well, and
like
I think
that.
as we get older, we start to realize, especially as you read more history, that people will always invent new systems to enslave other people, no matter what.
Wow.
It does not matter what the system is. There's like, because you see that with communism and socialism, right?
Right.
Let's have a system where everybody's equal. This is George Orwell, Animal Farm 101 here, right?
Animal Farm 101.
Animal Farm 101, that's right.
1984.
Let's have it where all are equal, but some are more better equal than other, right? So it's like that always creeps in because that's kind of the downfall of humanity, is that if we have the opportunity to advance above somebody else, to be better, to be greater, whatever that looks like, we will.
The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes and the pride of life.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think the Bible has lots of stories that are sobering reminders of that.
Good point.
And
Derrick.
so, yeah, that shift, I definitely see it. I see that in you. I definitely think you change the world one person at a time.
Yeah.
And it is, and don't get me wrong, there are things that need to be changed on a macro systemic level. There definitely are a lot of things. But it's the heart. Yeah. You know, if you could change the system, but if you don't change the heart, then
sometimes we got to start small. And I feel like in the Bible, man, the Bible is just such a classic work because it deals with these things.
Yeah.
The way for these things really to change, and I know this might sound really cliche and really like, well, duh, but it's repentance.
Yeah,
it's it really is.
It's just that turning away.
And to continue to turn away, right? Yeah. You know, John the Baptist said that, you know, continue on with repentance in like John chapter 2 or something to that effect.
I'm surprised you still call him John the Baptist.
What, St. John?
St. John the Baptizer.
Yeah, you could say that, John the Baptizer.
But yeah, no, I think that's good because I think, again, I've been doing a lot of reading and studying lately about the narrative, right? How the narrative shifted and changed on slavery, not just in the West, but in the world at large. And it really is that you have to have an individual that's willing to speak up at the right place in the right time. And even if, because I was learning about this with like the Quakers, and you had like this couple that was like outspoken on slavery in like the 1600s, and everybody just wrote them off. But 20 years of him being outspoken, and on his deathbed, he learns that the Quakers have decided that slavery is not biblical.
Wow.
So it right? And that's one man, 20 years, one denomination, but it still had another 200 plus years before it right?
Right.
So it's individuals staying faithful to what they know is true and good. Now, at this point, we take a break from life in the gray, which is, now that I look back on it, it's kind of crazy because we were at the height of everything. And then we all were getting really busy with things, and we took an indefinite hiatus on it.
Oh yeah, that's right. Indefinite.
Little did we realize that the world was about to turn on its head.
Oh my.
And it's in the world turning on its head, and we enter 2020, that as we see all the craziness going on with the pandemic, with Black Lives Matter, with George Floyd, and with the election and politics,
Right.
that we said, guys, the gray's got to come back.
When things aren't black or white.
We live life in the gray.
Join us in conversing about God, church, and culture. This is Michelle.
This is Luther.
And this is Derrick.
By the way, that might be my favorite intro.
I told you
that
thing
might
was-
be my favorite.
It
of the
was
three.
fire.
Oh, it's so good.
It was fire.
If you look at our episode titles, politics, conspiracy theories, race in America revisit, like we're tackling all the big issues of 2020.
Right.
And so I want to play a clip here
From which one?
from, this is going to be kind of a fun one. So this episode was recorded, I think like May, June of 2020. And these were our predictions for what life would be like after the pandemic.
Wow.
So I'm going to play and
Okay.
we're going to kind of see, what do we get right?
What
did we get wrong?
I'm sure I got a lot wrong.
I actually think you got more right than me.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look.
All right.
And the whole world is in it together. All of a sudden, we are not each other's enemy. You know what I mean? Now, we may act like it when we're yelling at each other at the supermarket or, you know, when we're, doing whatever. But ultimately, we see a greater connection with one another.
Yeah.
And God knew this was going to happen in 2020. We all knew that with this 2020 election coming up, that this is just a bomb waiting to go off.
Oh, yeah.
Whoever gets elected, it's going to be really bad. If Trump gets reelected again, everybody's going to lose their mind. And if a Democrat gets in the office, everyone's going to lose their mind. It doesn't matter how the results are going to go. Not everyone's going to be happy.
Satisfied.
So I do think that one of my hopes is that if God knew this was going to happen, and this was a way that this polarization and this hostility that we have, not just in America, but in the world, could be put to ease.
Yeah,
That could be powerful, guys.
that would be nice.
I think the inequality gap is going to grow between the rich and the poor. The middle class is going to grow even more fragmented. And so I do think there's going to be, but we're going to realize that, like, hey, it's that middle to lower class that's doing all these deliveries, that's in the grocery stores, in the warehouses.
Yeah.
And we're going to realize if they're sick or they're not taken care of well, that affects us.
But no, I think homeschooling is going to boom. I think that obviously, like a lot of things are going to be moved to the virtual world, like crazy.
Do you guys think that this is the final nail in the coffin for retail, like brick and mortar stores?
No.
Probably not. but man, a lot of things are going to be moved. Like, man, Amazon's going to like boom like crazy. Well, it's already booming, of course, but like online shopping is going to be so much more of a thing.
Yeah.
For so many people.
Without having to pay all this rent on a building.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Oh, that's a good point. A lot of stuff, like a lot of places that meet, because rent is pricey.
Young, naive, optimistic little me thought that we were going to all come together and kumbaya.
We're more divided than ever.
Gosh, yeah, that did not age. I mean, it was hopeful, but man, I feel like it's even worse now.
Dang, I didn't say anything about the vaccine on there.
You actually did that in the conspiracy theory episode.
Oh, what episode was that?
This was Where Was God During COVID?
During COVID. Okay, okay.
You actually did have a lot of thoughts on the conspiracy theory
for
episode.
some reason I thought this was the...
Especially about Bill Gates and vaccines.
And mosquitoes and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, man. But I'll give myself one thing I got right, was that the inequality gap was going to grow. That the rich will become richer, the poor will become poorer. I think that's the one thing that I'll say that definitely did happen.
Yeah.
But you had some home runs.
Really?
You had some home runs. Homeschool boom.
It did
absolutely
boom.
has
It did
boomed.
boom. That's true.
Yes.
Oh, man.
It's surprising to me how much virtual school people still do, like for homeschool, because I think a lot of damage was done through at least the public schools doing virtual schooling, right? But you also said that a lot of things are going to shift online.
Yeah,
I think that's true.
Which we kind of seen the elements of that happen on its way to happening.
Right.
So I can't get too much credit for it.
Sure. Well, and to be fair, like the brick and mortar, like the stores, I think, I mean, I have friends in realty that tell me this is the worst time
I bet
to have a brick and mortar, like that kind of, you know, like especially in the area we're in South Florida. But rent is going up high. It's something you alluded to as well, right? So,
especially in South Florida?
Yeah, it's bad here.
Yeah. Hundreds of dollars jumped up. And then by the next lease, it's ridiculous. What I got
on the conspiracy episode, I brought up aliens too. And now that's in the news now more than ever. So,
get some alien news happening. Oh, man.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Good stuff.
So we spend season 4 tackling these really controversial topics. We only have one guest on the entire season. And I'll go on record saying that this was probably the guest conversation that I personally enjoyed the most. And that was Jack Levison.
Yeah.
Which was a big deal at the time getting him on because he's a big author.
Bible scholar.
Yes, Bible scholar, author. This was the most like well-known guest that we had. This was also in our top 5 most listened to episodes that we had. It was this, it was the cussing one, a couple others that I'm going to talk about in a bit. So what I want to do now actually is I want to kind of, as we've gone on for a while now, I want to play a couple different things. Like if I could pick one episode that shows me exactly where I'm going to land, it would have to be that Spirit in the Gray episode. And so I'm going to play a couple clips from that. And it's very interesting to kind of like go back and hear it and be like, wow, I could see where it was all heading.
Wow. Okay.
And then I want to talk about your journey as well. So
let's do it.
In America, we're into issues. We don't want the story. We want to know if you're right about sexuality. We want to know if you're right about politics. We want to know if you're right about speaking in tongues. And I think the story allows us to embrace something the way we might jump into a river and be carried along. Issues don't do that. There is a story that exists, whether you believe it or not, whether you feel it or not. It's sort of like the Black Lives Movement right now, right? Black Lives Matter. And it doesn't matter whether white evangelicals care about it or not. It's there. It's there. They can choose not to believe it. They can choose to deny it. They can choose to say it's wrong. It's there. And, there's a lot that's happening in life that if you believe it or feel it, it really doesn't matter. It's there. And the gospel story is one we need to keep telling and telling and telling, because finally people say, oh, it's like C.S. Lewis, right? He's talking to these Christians. He's talking to these damn Christians. He's talking to these Christians, right? And talking and talking. And one day it hits. I think our job is not to make them feel, of course, we love them and we affirm them and we care for them and we embrace them and we let them know we're safe people for them. But we also tell that story again and again.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Well said, Jack.
You must be speaking right to Derrick's heart because he is the narrative guy.
Yeah, seriously. Everything you're saying is like, oh, it's just beautiful.
Courses in narrative therapy, and he's always telling a story, and it really is about.
Well, I personally really believe, and they hear me harp on this all the time, that story is our key as humans to understanding the world, understanding God, and understanding each other. So,
God has a great story, and it's not a story, right? And it's not without warts. It's not without violence. It's not without violence to women. It's not without racism. That's all part of the story out of which God tries to bring joy and love and justice and compassion. But it's not a Disney story.
No.
It's not a Disney movie. And so, yeah, I think we keep living and telling that story.
Yeah, it's crazy because the seeds of like where you are today.
With all things narrative, right?
With all things
the
narrative,
emphasis on it. Yeah.
You see it kind of, the breadcrumbs in some of our older episodes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You totally do.
Wow.
What he's articulating there of this whole idea of the messiness of the story, right? And I think like that, if there's anything that Life in the Gray taught me, like if I could summarize what my journey was, it was going from understanding to critiquing to finally accepting. It might be a weird word for it, but accepting the fact that the story is messy. That was my journey over Life in the Gray.
Wow.
Was recognizing that, yeah, the Bible's messy. I mean, obviously we could be that, but still, like, it's the Bible. But then we think about 2,000 years of history and recognizing that everything is messy and there is a lot of gray because of that.
Wow.
I was understanding that in my personal life through like my family history and through my spiritual life through the history of Christianity, right? And I think like that was the lesson I had to learn, was that even though it's messy to get somewhere, it's what do you do once it's your turn? Going back to what you shared about personal responsibility, right?
Wow. Yeah.
It's like, I understand the context, but now it's my turn.
Right.
What am I going to do different this time?
Yeah. And to piggyback off what you just said, for me, I think my Life in the Gray journey was investigating / really looking into it, like trying to understand it, similar to what you said.
Yeah.
Then it moved to criticism.
Yeah, we were both in that.
Right.
Yep.
After there was a level of like understanding as far as in investigation and scoping out. So it moved from that to criticism and then to exploration, like exploring.
Yeah.
So it's crazy because when I was in the space of investigation as well as criticism, I never planned to get out. Like the point was to reform what was there.
Yes.
And kind of gives me some not too happy, weird flashbacks with like Martin Luther, the original reformer. Like he was never trying to start his own church.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. He just showed his colors of being unorthodox and to then eventually kind of go a different direction. But he was really just trying to see reform within the Catholic Church.
Right.
He would have thought it to be the church that had, until his views kind of changed a little bit later. But I think a lot of people kind of go through that too, where they see problems, whether it's in the church or whether it's in certain things, and they think, well, the goal is maybe to fix it.
Yeah.
And I think what you and I have come to realize in our journey, there's some things you can't change.
Yeah. Accepting the things you can't change.
You either accept it.
It doesn't mean you agree with it.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're okay with it.
Right.
But you recognize that this is what happened.
This is what happened, and this is what it is.
Yeah.
And this is what it's going to be, unless for some unforeseeable reason something else happens. But yeah, I think we've noticed that in a lot of things in life, and things we can't even mention in this podcast, right? That just we can't change.
Yeah.
And we have to be okay with that messiness and say, okay, this is what it is. Are you going to embrace it for what it is?
Yeah. Well, in narrative practices, we distinguish between a dominant narrative and an alternative narrative, right? So dominant narratives are problem saturated. So a lot of people who deconstruct their faith, and a lot of people who have been where both you and I have been, we have a very problem saturated narrative of how we look at the story of Christianity. And rightfully so. There's a lot of problems and a lot of things that happen. in that narrative. But you also see these alternative and almost counter narrative that runs alongside it, right? And it's recognizing that that's the narrative that God is pushing his people through, right? That God is really pushing us as human beings through, so that we can critique the dominant problem narratives. You know, we have to always be careful that we don't become part of those narratives, right? That we don't get wrapped up in narratives around and discourses around racism, around slavery, around theological ideas and concepts that dehumanize people. What does it mean to find the narrative that Christ has always been leading a people through? Because like I said it back in Life in the Gray that I still stand by, Jesus was ahead of us the whole time. We're just trying to catch up.
Wow.
So the most popular episode for the longest time actually had to do with reforming.
Really?
And it was our episode called Calvinism?
With a question mark. Right?
With a question mark. And so in talking about your journey, because I think if you listen to the Calvinism episode and you contrast that to one of our last episodes, I think the difference is night and day. But when you think back to that premise, to that episode about Calvinism, I mean, what are your thoughts? What does new Luther think of Luther from 2018, 2019, trying to convince people like me?
Was that 2018?
That was 2018, yeah.
Oh, that's so embarrassing. I feel like that's not too far away. I'm like, please.
A lot
tell
can
me
happen in 5 years.
I was like, tell me it was 2007.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, yeah, you hit it on the nail with just the process of your journey. And man, it's so crazy how we change over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would also say, so there's a lot of like, and this is just me personally, I can't say this for other Calvinists, but there's a lot of turning a blind eye to what you experience in the real world and what your theology says.
Yeah.
You know, like you
Absolutely.
legit have to like, what's the word, Derrick? Like, in a sense, like really kind of shut off some things just to make it work. And I did that for a while and I was tired of it. Something that this was not recorded, so I don't know if you remember this. Something that I never forget to this day. There was an episode that we did where you mentioned like, does God hate people or love or something like that? I forget the nature of what you asked towards me. And I was like, of course, God hates the sinner.
Oh, I remember this.
Yeah,
this was like in a van or something we were talking about.
He abhors the sinner. No, this was recorded.
Oh, it was recorded?
Yes, this was actually with one of your best friends from California.
That episode. Oh my gosh, yes.
And I was regurgitating what I heard from R.C. Sproul.
Yeah.
Right? Dr.
Name
R.C.
drop
Sproul,
it. Name drop it.
The theologian, this is big in the reform world, right?
Yeah.
And I regurgitated what he said. I'm like, clearly this is R.C. Sproul. Like, this is like quoting the Bible.
This is gospel, yeah.
This is gospel here. So I repeat that from the question that you asked. I forget the exact question, but I was like, of course. Like, I think you asked me something to the effect of, does God love the sinner and hate the sinner? Something like that.
Yep.
And I was like, he abhors the sinner. And I think I read
that don't sound orthodox to me, Lou.
Yeah, it's definitely not orthodox at all. It's like he hates the sinner. Those who have a hatred for his law, he despises them. I repeated something from RC. And when I said that, my mouth felt so dirty.
I remember.
It
it's
felt
coming back
so
to me now.
disgusting coming out of my mouth. And I said, like, I didn't care what, at that point, I didn't care what R.C. Sproul or what Voddie Baucham or whoever, I don't care what these Reformed scholars say, it just sounded wrong to me. And I said, Derrick, delete that.
Yep. Well, isn't that interesting thing about...
I asked you to delete it.
Yep, you did. That was the first time. And that's the interesting thing about religion that you have to be careful of, especially if you have a very religious impulse, is just taking things that people say and just downloading it and saying, yeah, that's it.
Right.
And I think what both you and I were doing through Life in the Gray was moving away from doing that. I think both you and I had realized that we were doing that and we didn't want to anymore. I appreciate you sharing the honesty of that moment. I had tons of moments like that too, where I repeated a bunch of garbage that I don't stand for anymore.
Right.
Because I think you recognize that that's not what I actually think.
Right. I was like,
That's
God loves the world.
But you put these people up on a pedestal.
Right.
That you're like, oh yeah. No, I think they got that one wrong.
Right.
Yeah. So it's fascinating because we both were in that Reformed Calvinist way of thinking for so long. And when you get sucked into that, you just kind of get the names of the people that are quote unquote right. And you just got to read their books, listen to their sermons.
Go to their conferences every year.
Yeah.
Even though they believe in sola scriptura. Right?
Yeah. So
other books.
yeah. So it's
another conference on predestination.
Yeah, that's right. Why God's sending people to hell. Oh man.
The fourth predestination conference this decade. Sheesh.
Gosh, yeah.
Just tell me to read Romans 9.
Just tell me to read Romans 9. No, I say don't read Romans 9 because you're going to misinterpret it. Go to the church fathers if you need some help with Romans 9 because those guys ain't going to help. Sorry, I probably sound so disrespectful.
You said those guys ain't going to help?
I said, what?
Consensus.
Anyways, but all this leads to how we ended Life in the Gray. We had lots of guests that came on, but hands down, the episode that got the most downloads was our second to last. And that was, Am I Still a Christian?
It got the most downloads.
That got the most downloads by the time it was all said and done. That was one that people really paid attention to. For
nosy.
And for worse.
They want that tea.
They want the tea. That's right. And we brought it because that episode, we recorded that December 31st, 2020, and it got released April 2021.
So we're almost at the end, huh?
Yeah, this is the end here.
Wow.
And this is where we kind of see and we start vocalizing where the journey was heading.
Wow.
So I'm going to play a clip from some things that you said, Lou, on this episode.
Let's hear it.
I guess where I'm at right now, December 31st, 2020. So by the time that this episode drops, I may be Orthodox or not. I don't know. Technically, I can't claim to be that.
Yeah.
But where I'm at is, Derrick, I'm heavily leaning towards Eastern Orthodoxy.
I'm nodding my head.
Yeah, you're just looking like, yeah. But man, that's where I'm at. I was studying the Eucharist. Now I've had some, I've always been fascinated with history, right? And anytime I used to preach at my church or anything like that, I would always dig as far as I could go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying, some people ask me, hey, how do you get some of that historical context and some other things? Some stuff is not all boxed in neatly.
Right.
That you could just, systematize and put in a box. Here in the West, we have systematic theology,
Neat
everything.
Categories.
You could pull it off a shelf, but it wasn't so cut up and nice for me.
Yeah.
In that Eastern tradition, but yet it was still it was beautiful and it was understandable. And even the way that they talked about Christ, and you could see the love and the reverence, it's just different. But anyways, fast forward, leading a life group at my church, and we started practicing communion or the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper. Looking at the history, seeing what the early church fathers had to say about it, and to see that they saw it as more than a symbol. Right. To your point, I could not conceive that they thought it to be this way, but then I had a decision to make. Was it, do I hold to what these first Christians believed, or do I hold to the Protestant movement? But yeah, man. So long story short, that kind of, in a way, led me to the Eastern Orthodox Church. And all these guys that were before us, Tertullian, Gus, and you name it, I'm just like, man, like they have an unbroken continuity. They have a history. They have a rich history. And it doesn't just start in the 1600s. And long story short, that's the beginning of a long journey of study for me.
Well, not so much Tertullian. I don't really read much of him these days. But man, I was wet behind the ear back then. I was a puppy.
Well, there's one thing you said at the end there, that this was a beginning of a long journey of study for me.
Right.
I question if that is true, though. I feel like you've always been on this long journey of study, even since Life in the Gray was started. I just think this is where it brought you.
Right. No, that's a good point, Derrick. I mean, there's something that I said there. So when I used to preach at my old church, some people would ask me like, hey, where'd you kind of get whatever from?
Yeah.
And I was always a digger.
Yeah.
You knew it. Like when I come to your house.
It's one of the things I most love about you.
The first pit stop I would make is to your bookshelf.
Yep.
I mean, I didn't do it today, but back in the day, what's up here today? Like, what you got now? I kind of cooled off a little bit with that.
Because I don't have as many Orthodox books.
That's not crazy.
He's like, all this Protestant trash. Get it out.
No.
What am I going to purge from the shelf? What Orthodox books do I need to add to his library? He's got Augustine up here. He's got some church fathers, but he don't have enough, y'all.
I promise I didn't mean it like that. You got some good reads. Huh? No, you got Augustine.
I purged all my Reformed stuff, Lewis. Okay?
I see NT right over here, bro. No, I literally, the kids, we went straight to lunch and things like that. So that's the reason I didn't make that pizza. Yo, that's funny. Okay, but what was I even saying? I forgot. Yeah, the digging. It's just always been something that, I don't know, I've always wanted to get to the root of things. And I think in a lot of ways, Eastern Orthodoxy helped me find a root.
Wow.
A rock.
Yeah.
That's not shifting sand, something that it's there, and you could kind of look at its progression throughout the centuries and see the beauty of it throughout the centuries, and some of the messiness.
That's the narrative there.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
The way that you articulated that, you were searching for that root.
Right.
And you were in a circle at the time where you thought you had found it. And then you did more digging and you realized it went deeper.
Right. Yeah. And in a lot of ways, maybe that some of that criticism I had is because I felt like, man, where is the root? Like you were talking about earlier with the Reformation being overrated. We talked about, even Calvinism. Like, where was the root of that? Like, where's Calvinism in the 4th century? Who's articulating? Now, people, Calvinists are like, oh, that's anachronistic, right? But that's not the point. Like, where's the seed? If it's apostolic, where's the seeds of it? Show me it. Maybe it's not articulated in the same way as the Reformers, but I need to see I need to see tulips somewhere in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. Continue on. I need to see them in these centuries.
Yeah.
And I just personally, it just didn't sit well with me for that kind of innovation.
Yeah. And speaking of messiness, man, was my journey at the end. Woo. Christian humanism.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where it led you, huh?
That's where it led me. Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Let's play. I'll actually let me play a little clip here from that time to the episode that got me in more trouble than any other episode, bar none.
You did get a lot of heat for that.
I sure did.
But you get to this point, you know, when you've been a Christian for a while, and I mean a good while, and you realize that you've just been absorbing things. You've absorbed a lot of beliefs, and you didn't necessarily take the time to think through if you actually believe those things or not, right? When you listen in a Christian bubble, Christian subculture, right? That's where I work. That's where we work.
Serious.
What if I've wasted it? Like, what if I'm in the wrong boat here, so to speak, of belief? What if I've given my life to something that's wrong or false? And I started to realize, like, well, are these thoughts actually my own, or have I taken on the thoughts of other people? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
no,
so
that makes
I
sense.
started to realize I had an identity crisis. I was like, who am I? Have I just absorbed all these things for the last 14 years? Because people have said, well, you're a Christian. This is what you have to believe.
What Christian is.
But is that actually what I believed, you know? And so I started to flirt with secular humanism and in not being a Christian. When you want to become sure of something you believe in, what do other Christians do? They give you books that are going to make you more certain of what you already believe in or what you're trying to believe in, right? So you could read Lee Strobel's Case for Christ and all you want and then be like, yep, this is definitely what I believe. But I realized I had spent 14 years reading books that were just confirmation bias.
Yes.
Just books that were just like, well, this is what I want to read because this is what I want to believe. I'm not actually after the truth.
Yeah.
And I know that's going to sound harsh,
No,
but I
that's a good
realize
point, bro.
I'm not actually after, I'm after what I want to believe.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
It's where I think I land now,
Okay.
which is
Well, let's hear
being
it.
a Christian humanist. Maybe we shouldn't be so dependent on God to fix all our problems. But I'm also not going the secular humanist route where I think it's all humans and it's up to us. Maybe there's a synergy and a partnership here. Maybe God is a little more different than we think. And maybe God is working in and through us to be the blessing. So that's where I'm at.
So trippy hearing all this stuff again.
Yeah, that caught the world by storm.
It did.
When it dropped.
It did.
Like you had to go to work on eggshells the next day.
I went everywhere on eggshells for a while.
Man, and like it's crazy because when that happened,
Uh-huh.
I mean, I was like, yo, guys, Derrick's gonna be okay.
It was like a marathon. I just remember talking to people like nonstop that week.
You have a very supportive wife.
I have a very supportive wife, very supportive friends, a lot of very supportive people like you.
Thanks, man. Yeah, because I remember even like early on when you're like, it wasn't like fully understood what that was all about.
Yeah.
Like, your wife was still by your side.
Yeah.
You know, she was a little concerned at first, you know, as you probably knew, but she knew everything was going to be okay. She told me, check on him. And probably wouldn't take that back after I became Orthodox. Like, never mind. We don't want you checking on him. No, I'm just kidding. But no, she was supportive. Even your close friends. We knew you'd be. I think we had a follow-up episode just talking about like everyone that was concerned. Like, guys, like, what is the judgment day going to be about?
Yeah.
You
I think
know?
that was, yeah. And I think it was just being open about the journey, right? And there were definitely things that I would have changed how we would have gone about all that, but I don't like regret that it unfolded that way. I shared a lot about this on my deconstruction episode, but I do think that was a huge learning moment in life.
Right.
You know, in a lot of ways. And so releasing, I tell people this all the time, releasing that podcast episode, whether it was right or wrong to do in the way that it was done.
It wasn't wrong.
Right. But there were things around it that I didn't do well. and that I should have done better in communicating to people close to me. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
So there were things about how it all came about, and there were things I didn't do well. But
tell me off air.
Yeah. But at the same time, I felt free.
That's what it was.
It was really, and I still to this day feel that freedom. Like, I feel like I can speak my mind about what I actually think and feel about something. Now, I mean, it did work out that like this whole path of, because a lot of
look what it birthed. It birthed the business, man.
Well, the business, it's so funny how the business was going, like the ideas of it.
Bubble.
Yeah, they were coming out, right? But I think part of this was that I was done being in the Christian bubble. I was done working at the Christian, or like, right? I think that was the big push I needed to kind of be like, I want to be out in the world interacting with people, you know?
It's so funny. Like, it's crazy because like usually like there's some people in the outside world like, oh, I just want to be, I just want to be in a place where
it's the opposite, right?
Read my Bible, go to the little Christian coffee shop, and like you have people in there in that space like, get me out, this is toxic. And obviously not everybody feels that way.
Yeah, no, it's really trippy to look back on. I do get asked every once in a while if I still what the Christian humanist label like really is to me. And I'm like, it's very helpful to understand how I see faith, but it's not a label that I really use. Even like, so to bring this like...
What label would you
so I knew
resonate with?
That's what you were going to ask, right?
Yeah.
The work I do with All Things Narrative, there's like 3 questions I get asked most frequently. One of those top 3 questions I get asked by potential clients or people who are interested in my business is, okay, so is this spiritual at all? Is this religious? Are you religious in any way? Top 3 questions I get asked. And I answer the same way every time.
Right.
I say up front, so my background, that I identify with Christ, I say that I come up front and I just try to be honest. Like, yeah, like my background, my beliefs, like I am a Christian. But I also distinguish that, like, I want you to be aware of that. But I want you to know that when we meet, it's not about me. I'm interested in you, where you're at, right? Like, this isn't like a ministry. I think, and I even have conversations with clients about the label, right? Because I do work with clients who were Christians at one point and aren't anymore. And there's assumptions that they can make with the label, right? So I do have those conversations if needed, just about, well, are you like a MAGA Christian? Like what do you mean when you say Christian, right? Sometimes Eastern Orthodox would make my life a lot easier, because then people would be like, what is that?
What is that?
Maybe that's how I get in.
Is he Jewish?
Well, that's the other thing too, right? Is I have to try to explain to people like, well, like I also like have this like Jewishness about me, like ethnically, but I wasn't raised Jewish, and there's a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of things about Jewish thinking and the way you see the world that I really not only resonate, but just believe. Like, that's how I see it, right? And yeah, so that's the trippy thing, right? Is like having these conversations, but just being honest, just being open. Like, yeah, like this is my journey. This is where I'm at. And, when you read a book like Dominion, or there's another great book, Thomas Cahill's books, Gift of the Jews and Desire of the Everlasting Hills. Yep, right up there on those shelves. Those are books that are written by non-Christian, by secular historians. And those are books that I point to and say, like, this is why I'm proud to be a Christian. Like, I know, like, if you have trauma about the Bible and church and all that stuff, these books explore a rich history of ultimately what Christianity has brought to the world that has helped. It's brought a lot of harm, but it's also brought a lot of good. And same with Judaism. And so that's why I point to those and other things as well. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at now.
Wow.
So, man, we've taken this trip down memory lane.
We really did. We got there. From the start to the finish.
Yeah.
Man.
So I like to tell people that I was like, I'll say I'm raised by ex-Catholics ethnically Jewish but not raised in it. One of my best friends is Eastern Orthodox. I've been in both conservative and liberal church circles, thought about being, a secular humanist. So it's like the ways I can relate to people because of the journey, because of the experiences, right? And make it worth it.
Yeah, which is really good for the work that you're doing, that you can relate to so many people.
Absolutely. And I'm thankful to God for all of it.
That's awesome.
So yeah, this has been Life in the Gray. This has been the reflection here. So any final thoughts on just this journey?
Yeah, any final thoughts, man? Man, I appreciate you. Thank you for not only getting me on the pod, man, but just the journey. As I got to think through the years, man, we had some really great memories. Still creating memories.
We are, yeah, absolutely.
And,
I love when our families hang out together. And
yeah, so grateful, man. Like it's crazy how years ago, like even from you being at my wedding to like when the first day we met at work,
and the road trips. Let's not forget the road trips we took together too.
Yeah, to
oh my gosh, we
recorded
recorded episodes doing road
on
trips.
the road. How do you record on the road? Right?
We had the handheld mic. Oh man, those were awesome. That
Good
was
days,
so much
man.
fun doing all that.
I appreciate you, man, and I'm very proud of you. I've always said this about you, and I'm not joking when I say this. You are one of the most creative people I know.
Wow.
You are a creative person, and you're a genius in a way, and Life in the Gray wouldn't have been what it is without you. So
thanks, man. And same for you. Man. And neither would have been my movies. My movies wouldn't have been the same without you either.
Derek's created movies. Derek's done
so
podcasts.
Go on a rabbit hunt. I'm not going to tell you where, but if you go on YouTube, you'll see a parody of The Office where Luther is Jim Halpert.
Please don't embarrass
and
me.
You'll
I can't believe I cut my mustache for that.
You cut your mustache.
I was
for
like
that.
a big fat Oompa Loompa.
Filmed the day before the world shut down for COVID.
Literally.
Filmed the whole thing. And there's another movie out there where Luther is a Thanos-like character.
Oh yeah.
And you were like, I don't want to play the bad guy anymore.
Don't worry, they won't be able to find that.
Oh man, it's out there. The movies we used to make together. You'll never find them, but if you do, send us an email and say, "Hey, we found it." LOL. Oh man. Well, this has been fun. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Luther, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, it was so much
for
fun,
being a
man.
part of this.
I hope the listeners are blessed by it.
Yeah. Don't forget to check out Luther's podcast. One more time, where can they find it?
Oh yeah. So The Transfigured Life. It's on YouTube. We just started a couple months ago, but when this episode released, probably we've grown a little bit. So yeah, check us out. Observe. Even if you're not Orthodox, you're more than welcome. Right. Everyone's invited. It should be fun.
And since it's November, on Saturday, November 18th, we're gonna have another storytellers sessions coming up. So you've been out to a couple of those. So loved having you. I want to get you up on stage one time to share your story. You know.
Oh man.
But yeah, so that's gonna be coming up. So check out in the show notes details on that as well. And so yeah, we're gonna end this episode by playing the last bits of the episode we did before we went on hiatus for Life in the Gray, because of course we got to end this in traditional Life in the Gray fashion where Luther sings something.
I sung something?
Oh, you sang all the time. I almost did like a montage of all the singing you did.
Oh my goodness.
So anyways.
Too bad I can't sing.
Yep. So anyways, we're going to sign out with Lou singing. So thank you so much. This is Life in the Gray reunion with your friendly narrative practitioner, Derrick, and of course, my brother, one of my best friends, Luther Menard.
Thanks, brother.
Take it away, Lou.
We're an hour in, and I don't want it to end, but we probably should wrap it up.
But we got to come to the end.
Yeah.
Although we come on, MT.
To the end of the road.
Guys,
I didn't even know this song before today.